You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Wiener. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. This is my first episode! When I thought about this show, which I've been thinking about for a long time, the kind of people that I wanted to talk with on this show, I knew that I wanted to have friends. You're going to meet some of my best friends on this show, but I wanted to talk to my friends because I already have great conversations with them, and I know that there are some deep gems I wanted to unearth for you guys to share. So I knew I wanted to talk to friends. I knew that this would be an awesome opportunity to reach out to people that I fangirl over or I admire their work. And you're going to see me talk to strangers, literally people I've met for the first time, talking to them on this show, which is kind of amazing. So you're going to see a variety of people on this program. And we are going to talk about things like life and death, and all the in-betweens could be anything from careers and childhood and relationships and how we're coping and managing with life in general in the world. That whole life, death, and everything in between is really about a journey to talk about living the good life. We've been talking about the good life, forever, right? Socrates talked about the unexamined life. I've been very interested in what it means to live a good life. And I define that as a life that you love on your own terms. And so for some people, that means that to live a life on your own terms, you have to challenge family histories. You have to challenge cultural stereotypes. You have to do some deep work on trauma and healing and recovery. Your good life is going to look different from my good life. And I wanted to create a platform where we could talk about all of those things. So the reason why I put it up against the title of We're All Gonna Die Anyway is because we are all going to die anyway. We know that we have an expiration on our lives. We don't often know when. And so while we will talk about death and loss on this program, sometimes we won't. Sometimes we'll talk about some other things. So I hope you're up for that ride with me. I think as I've recorded these episodes, I have found such great magic and mysticism in the unknown. A lot of these conversations are not planned. Maybe all of them are really not planned. We don't give guests questions in advance. You'll see a framework for some of our conversations, but I really, really left space for the guests on the show to show up. We can talk about what's going on in their lives and in the moments that are happening right now. And so for this first episode, this guest is one of my favorite human beings. Now, I do feel grateful that I get to call her a friend. She's an extraordinary person, and she's good at so many things, actually. Here's just a few. She is Tony nominated. She is Emmy nominated. She is a Grammy award-winning singer and songwriter. She is an author and an activist and an executive producer. And she's produced incredible breakout albums and a song that I think everyone on this planet has sung along to at least once called Love Song. And she just launched a show as an executive producer on Apple TV called Little Voice, in which she composed the music. And if you're a Broadway fan, then you know that she made her Broadway debut composing the lyrics and the music for an incredible show called Waitress. That's right. My first guest today is Sara Bareilles. So when I first met Sara, I met her years and years ago at Rock and Roll Camp for Girls in Los Angeles. It's a program run by a mutual friend of ours. It is an incredible organization that brings music into the lives of girls, not just in Los Angeles, but actually all over the world. Because we are living in the current state that we are in, Sara and I had to Zoom this episode. She's in New York and I'm in LA. But you're going to see lots of different locations on this show, actually. When we started taping this, I started in January in this amazing studio that you're seeing now. We built a podcast studio. My husband, Felipe, helped to build these sound panels, and you're going to see him on the show too. So you're going to see this location. We've taken the show on the road when I've been out for speaking events, and now because we're in safer at home measures, we are Zooming it. So Sara and I Zoomed this episode, and just to put some context to it, we had this conversation in early June. And at that time, it was a pretty heavy day, even on the day that we were speaking. We've had lots of those heavy days during this period, but we'd been months into this quarantine. It was just about a week after George Floyd was murdered by police officers in Minneapolis. Black Lives Matters. We were protesting. We were taking to the streets. We were raising a lot of conversation about systemic violence, police brutality, and the racism that Black Americans have been experiencing for hundreds of years in this country. And we were talking about, the mental health and well-being of people, and physical health and well-being of people who are succumbing to COVID, struggling with COVID, and living in a time of great unknown. So there was a lot, and there is a lot still in our atmosphere. So the day that Sara and I connected for this conversation, some of it felt heavier, some of it felt, which it was at the time. And I think that's what I love about this program, and why I think I wanted to start with Sara today. And what you're going to see on this show is we meet our guests where we are. You're going to see us being kind of uncensored in a lot of ways about the things that are going on in our lives. And that's important to me. For me, that's a big part of living the good life, is being transparent and authentic. So we dig into a lot with Sara. If you imagine anything, if you know her or you imagine Sara, she is exactly what you imagine her to be. She is as kind and loving as she is talented. She leads from a heart space and a connective tissue to humanity. That is probably what helps make her such a brilliant artist, but she's just a really good person in progress, like we all are. And I have known her now to become more comfortable in talking about that progress for herself. She is going to share some things, I think, in this conversation that a lot of people are feeling and working through. Her commitment to understanding her place in her world with platform, with privilege, with opportunity is something that a lot of us are talking about as well. So we really go there in this conversation. I'm so grateful for her for being available and open, even in some really difficult times. And that's my promise to you on this program. We're going to go there. We're going to talk about the hard stuff together. We're going to talk about the great stuff together, and everything else in between. So I'm so excited to introduce you to my very first guest, Sara Bareilles. So here we go. I just want to reach through the screen and give you a squeeze. I miss hugging people. Do you miss hugging people?
God, so much, so much, so much. I'm lucky that my boyfriend lives with me and my sister is close, and we're kind of like a little pod. So I do get to hug a couple of people. Yeah.
I know. I don't realize how much I missed hugging people. I think I'm going to overdo it whenever we're allowed to do it again.
You're like, can you actually please?
Yeah, they're like, it's a little too much. I am so excited to have this level of conversation with you. Also, just based on where we're at in the world, we're in the throes of all kinds of emotion and experience in the country on top of the pandemic. So I don't know where we'll be at the time of which this airs and what state or place we'll be in. But over the last 11 weeks or so, we've watched our whole world turn into just different ways. And I'm definitely want to talk about that a little bit. But I actually wanted to start with a question that I know that you grew up in Eureka, right? In California, but so I wanted to ask a little bit, I don't know if you know this, about your birth story. Do you know anything about your birth story and your mom's experience with your birth?
I think I was born at 10 in the morning, I believe.
Ooh, okay.
On December 7th. And actually, I don't know that much about my birth story, I don't think, which is crazy. I was a cesarean, so I think, it was, they knew what was going on. But I think that's a good question for my mom. I never even thought to ask the details of what happened.
It's just funny because sometimes people have stories about their birth that are actually quite metaphorical for their life, and then sometimes like this, we don't often know. Also,
I know nothing about my birth, and I feel at the moment that I know nothing about my life. So maybe there's a deep connection, soul connection between where we're at.
But do we ever really know about our life? We're just...
I suppose maybe not. I guess that's part of what we are learning. Yeah.
We're stumbling. Yeah, I think we're all sort of stumbling through. But you grew up in Eureka, right?
Yeah.
And what kind of childhood did you have? Like, if you could describe it in 3 words, what would it be, do you think?
Oh gosh. I would say musical.
Mm,
Um, it's funny that the word that's coming up for me is solitary because I was the youngest of 3
yeah.
and by quite a big age difference. And so I spent a lot of time in the woods by myself. Like I did a lot of playing alone.
Wow.
Um, and musical solitary and funny. My family's really funny.
Are
We laugh
they?
a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Tell me about the musical part. Where does that come from in your family, in your childhood?
But everywhere, kind of.
Yeah.
I'm the only one that's pursued it professionally, but everyone is musical. And my grandfather on my mom's side had a beautiful voice, and
Mm,
always he grew up, and both my grandparents grew up in Hawaii, actually,
wow.
and so they did a lot of like they loved Hawaiian music, and they would play that, and my dad played the piano in the house. My mom and
Mm.
my older sisters were in musicals, and so I got introduced to musical theater probably first, and singing 3-part harmony with my sisters, and
Oh my
just
gosh.
a lot of I loved the connection that music provided for the family because I was so much younger. It was like the thing I could do with them because I always
Mm.
the annoying little one that always
Uh-huh.
wanted to try to and music was like the currency for that.
I
So
love that.
yeah, so that was
What was the first musical theater song or show that you were introduced to? Do you remember?
the very first one. Well, the one that sticks out for me a lot is Evita. Uh,
Mm.
oddly enough, it's like a random. It's actually kind of a tough.
Tense one, actually.
Well, my sister played the lead, and so she
Oh,
took her own, and so I must have seen that show, I don't know, a dozen times because we would just go to see my
of
sister.
course.
She was incredible in it. She's a beautiful, beautiful voice. So that is one of the formative memories. And then
Yeah.
Phantom of the Opera
Yeah.
is another one that I like listened to ad nauseum and would try to sing, and like I'm not a
Yeah.
soprano, and
Phantom was mine too. Cats was mine.
wow.
I remember Cats because, our mutual friend, Alex Lockamore, I went to middle school with, right? So we would go on these, and we were in this performing arts school, and we would go on these trips to New York. And so we would stay at the Edison Hotel, which I don't think exists anymore, does it?
So either I
No.
don't.
But we would stay in in the Edison Hotel, and then we would just go see like a ton of shows. But I remember like Phantom, Les Mis, and Cats were like,
That's like the trifecta.
I know. That's like what we had to do. And then watching him now grow up and contribute to his beautiful Broadway. I mean, that guy's like ridiculous.
Yeah. What I love about Alex, in addition to the depth and contribution of his craft,
Yeah.
that he is such a deeply kind, thoughtful, generous collaborator, and he's so intentional about how he works in addition to
Yes.
what he works on. And I think those kinds of people making those, intentional
Agreed.
creatives are few and far between. So it's really he's such a
Yeah. And he was a good human even at 12, and we were all sort of rocky at 12.
yeah,
You're not surprised. No, and he would play for everybody's stuff, when we were, I mean, he was just like, he was genius and we all knew it, but I'm happy to see the world know it
yeah,
now. And you're right. It's good to see good people who are also in alignment with what they're
yeah.
doing. Do you feel like you fell into alignment with what you ended up doing as far as music and pursuing it professionally?
I do. I think I've always had this sort of, I mean, it's the cliche phrase that I throw around all the time. It's why I named my first record. I'm working on a TV show called Little Voice.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a little sort of like whispering
Mm-hmm.
voice that was leading me to
Yep.
some truth.
Yep.
And music was kind of the conduit for
Yeah.
for me. I didn't When I used to dream about who I would be when I grew up, I imagined myself on stage more than I imagined
Mm.
myself, I mean on a theater stage, more than
Yep.
I imagined myself as a pop singer or anything. And once I started writing music, I realized I had more to say. I
Mm-hmm.
had more to say than just interpreting other people's materials. And I started really, I pulled out all my journals because I'm doing a little bit of research, and I like, I have
Yeah.
mountains of books like this that are full of my thoughts and feelings. And most of these have been like metabolized into music over the years. So
Yeah.
it's, music just became the way I interface with the world. So that's felt like a very sacred space for me, actually, and so that
Yeah.
feels very much in alignment.
In that solitary part for you as a kid, like when you were out in the forest or spending time amongst those beautiful trees in Northern California, did you sing when you were alone? Did you
Oh
talk to the trees? Yeah.
yeah, a lot of singing, a lot of making up songs, a
Yeah.
lot of singing Disney songs, a
Yeah.
lot of singing the opera. Yeah, yeah. I was doing a lot of like, I think just finding my voice and certain,
Yeah.
just enjoying the beautiful, the expansive imagination of being a child. Like kids just have this gift, and then we get older and it
Yep.
gets smaller and smaller, and we have to remind ourselves to keep imagining.
Agreed. Yeah, if I have similar experience, although not amongst the redwoods, but I visited my grandparents every summer in Queens, and they had a very small little garden outside. But I can distinctly remember, maybe I was like 11 or 12, mostly at these memories. And I would just all day from like sun up till sundown, just tell myself stories, make my sister participate in stories. And just, I was obsessed with soap operas, like that drama part of me. I think everything that was happening for me in school or in my friendships and relationships, like I was always sort of imagining the more theatrical versions of that or the musical versions of that. But that sort of unstructured, unfettered imagination
Yeah,
time, like I had no idea how much that would actually play a role in my life in giving me some discipline and creativity and expression.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
When you were growing up, what was childhood like? If you were to look back, so we had musical, funny, and solitary, but if you could look back on sort of the early years of you looking to find your voice, like what sorts of narratives were happening for you as a kid? Like what was childhood like for you? What were the lessons that you were facing or learning in the early part of your life?
I think I was learning, kindness was always really important in my family structure, and my, like, the way our parents cared for us and cared for our community.
Mm,
Um, I grew up Catholic, so we did, Catholic mass on Sundays and the coffee hour afterwards. So the church community was really important to
mm,
my family. And even though I am not a practicing Catholic anymore, I do appreciate that I got to learn about what a church community, the idea of
yes.
community, really means to someone.
Mhm.
And people find that and create that in all kinds of different ways. And I'm still a very spiritual person, but I think I was learning about kindness,
Mhm.
and I was learning about this sort of, I think on that same, in that same vein, was learning about my own spirituality, which is
Mhm.
that, music for me is church. Music
Mhm.
is my altar. Music is
Mhm.
the thing that I worship and talk to God through, and feel like that is the reason I am a vessel for anything at all, is because that is what's aligned for
Yeah.
me. Um, and that was all brewing when I was a little kid too. So it was like learning to love the piano and learning to listen to what does this piano want to say, and
Oh,
what are the trees saying, and trying to learn to
yeah.
interpret and to articulate things that weren't being said.
And that came pretty naturally to you to be in that kind of relationship.
I think so, but it was also something that I kept extremely private for many,
Mm.
many, many years. And it wasn't until I was well into college, like my junior year of college, before I really started playing any songs for anybody.
Wow.
I had kind of I had a hard experience of sharing a song at like a talent show in high school, and I could just sense that the audience didn't get it. And it was so painful.
Mm.
It was so painful that I got very, very small. And I went, I tend to be a little bit of a hermit crab anyway. It's like it takes a
Yeah.
lot for me to venture out. And then kind of, have to go back to my womb.
Yeah.
Um, but it took me a long time to share. And then the sharing, as usually people will discover for themselves, the sharing of the most vulnerable parts is the most powerful seat to be in, and
Right.
is the places where we grow the most and we find our deepest truths. And
Yeah.
kind of like that's the thing that's meant to be in the driver's seat as far as I'm concerned.
Me too, except for that tenderness that happens when you share and it's not received, and that rescinding I really, really get. I think bullying was a big part of my upbringing. I had a lot of terrorizing friendships. Friendships and relationships have been a really interesting theme for me as I'm looking back, and I started to do this show and talk to people about formative relationships they had. I think, for me being like very, very intuitive, very spiritual, but without the language for it.
Yeah.
Grew
Yeah.
up maybe similarly. I mean, I grew up in a Jewish family, not very practicing in religion as much as cultural tradition, but I had a sense of spirit and creativity and expression that would come through me. It came through me a lot too when I wrote. So
Mhm.
I too have immense amounts of journals starting at around age 12 or 13. And I read them now and I'm like, who was I as this little being? Like, stuff was coming through, but I felt sometimes that also, while it might have been a strength for me, was very ostracizing for relationships at that age. It was hard to connect for me.
Yeah. I think to this day, don't you find that like I don't have a lot of patience for like the superficial
I
layer.
can't do
I'm just
it.
not that interested in passing time. I just want to I'm
Yeah.
so much happier doing that on my own than
Yep.
I so I
Yeah.
really it's like and pretty quickly I think as you age, your barometer and your litmus test for who's going to be able to go there with you gets
Yeah.
more honed and attuned. So
100%. I also think that I think that's for me part of the journey that I relate to in your work, and the metaphor of voice in the work too, just the searching and the refining and the sharing and the discovering, which I don't think has an end date in mind. And I think, but I think the process can be, I don't know, we sometimes really glorify, like, everybody wants to have an authentic voice. That makes sense. But sometimes, like, to understand what it takes to claim that and really live in that and stand by that takes tremendous courage,
yeah.
especially in this world, right? And I think maybe more so now, I try to imagine young people now, um, with all of the hustle pressure of performative
Mm,
experience, this
yeah.
time spent amongst the trees or in a backyard or just thinking without structure, is a real gift and a blessing that I feel like we might have had from our childhoods that maybe don't exist in everyone's childhoods now.
I think especially too because everything is broadcast, so they don't get a chance to make mistakes
Yeah.
and not be punished. There's so much about finding yourself and finding who you are that is not cute and not worth the YouTube
No.
channel and not like, you know, like, I'm so grateful that I had the time and the precious privacy to be able to
Yes.
just like do some self-discovery work that didn't have to run in tandem with my own personal broadcast network.
Yes.
There's so
Yes.
much that's like handed to these kids at this age, and I think in a way they're being forced to have opinions about things maybe sooner than they do, or
Mhm.
feel refined. I mean, it's not a very forgiving space for any kinds of
Mm-mm.
messiness or mistakes.
Mm. Well, we don't get process, right? It's all product. And in one way, I think we're going to have some of the most incredible creators in this world because they have skills and tools that, I mean, and the ability to use them in ways I can't even fathom. I think about the filmmakers to come and I get so excited about how they know how to frame things and light things and look at things. And yet, you and I both work a lot with young women too. And I think what I see in my work is that there is that tender place of discovery that gets compressed a bit for feeling like you've got to rush through it to present a final product.
Mhm.
And then when you do present it, or when you change your mind, because think about how many times we change our minds when we're like 13, 16,
Oh,
26, 36, just, but that ability to pivot and be flexible and fluid, I feel like gets taken away in this social media culture because everything is so documented. And so you've got photographic proof. Well, you were this way over here. And so I think we're missing, all of us, but young people in particular, those important developmental years where you need to really screw up, and you need to screw up in private, hopefully.
Yeah, totally.
Not,
It's, forming, being a being that comes into formation, is not a straight line and not a particularly seamless process. It's a lot of highs and lows.
When you were developing your voice and performing as a younger person, when was there a space or place where you got feedback from adult professionals or adults in your life that tried to shape you, even early days before you became a professional artist, but would try to give you feedback on your material or on your creativity? And did that have an impact for you?
Yeah, I think, the times that it made the biggest impression was right at the very, very beginning, when I was just putting out feelers for like, what does one even do if they want to make music in a professional manner? I mean, I'm trying to think. I got really lovely, encouraging feedback from my chorus teachers. I was in an a cappella group in high school that we formed, and we sang Christmas carols, and I got a lot of encouragement as a singer.
Yeah.
I did not have I probably didn't have the courage yet to share very much as a writer. And when I did share, it would have made a really big difference to me if there had been someone who came up to me after that performance at the talent show and acknowledged. I mean, for all I know, they did, and I don't remember, but I don't think they did. I don't think anybody talked about that, because I felt embarrassed. I felt shame. And so shame is a super, super drug, right? So that if I had someone really take a moment to pat me on the back for my effort and for my willingness to try, I think that would have made a really big difference for me. Although, I'm always a believer that things happen as they should. And maybe if I had had more faith in myself, I wouldn't have become such an introspective person, and my life would be shifted in a different tone. I don't know. So, but when I was first getting started, I had people give me a lot of feedback, a lot of delicious feedback. Thank you for your opinion. It still comes. It's just like everyone seems to know what I should do, which is great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I am, talking too much, talking not enough, wearing the wrong things, doing the wrong things, doing the right things, just all of the above.
But isn't that such a big part of finding your voice, is being able to hear yourself amongst all of that swirl of commentary and opinion and critique? Did it click for you differently in college? Was college a formative space? I mean, I know you met somebody special, our friend Mona, in college. So I know that, and that's how we met. So I know that must have been an incredible friendship, but I'm curious, like, if that, as you got into that space in your life, if that shaped you differently.
Yes. College, I went to UCLA, and college was extremely formative. And really, I am someone who is really prone to the volatile experience. Like, I have really high highs, really low lows. One of my dearest passengers in my vehicle is melancholy. Like, I am someone who has a lot of I carry a lot of sadness, and I carry a lot of I'm prone to depression, I'm prone to anxiety. All of these things really started to flare in college for me. And so finding the outlets that were the healthy places to share and express and cope, which were some of the performative outlets. So joining my a cappella group, I felt like my people. Like, so elated to find a community that enjoyed.
And this was in college too, the a cappella group? Is this where okay. What were they called in college?
Awaken a cappella. Yeah. We sounded like a church group. I saw them perform at like the UCLA Spring Sing, which is their spring talent show. I saw them perform and I was just mesmerized.
Mm.
They were incredible, and I made some very close friends. And you know, college is challenging. It's you're out on your own for the first time. The independence is exhilarating and terrifying. And
Yep.
there's this small part, at least in my experience, that started to creep up where it was like, wait. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how
Mhm.
to be an adult. Like I'm not an adult. Like you keep telling me like I'm in charge of myself, and that doesn't feel very good. And then it felt amazing. It was all everything in between. But I really started to do more writing. And so
Mm.
music was a really close friend through my college experience to kind of help me navigate. And I realized, oh, I'm not just a singer. Like I don't
Yeah.
mean that to be pejorative. I just mean
Yes.
like I really need to be a writer as well. It was very much in me.
That's such a deepening of your voice too, and to be able to be in control of it in a different way.
Yeah, completely.
We have very, I didn't know as much about this, but I think we have very similar journeys. Melancholy definitely has been a co-pilot for me too, and I think I didn't have language for it. And actually, I haven't had, in my experience of depression and anxiety, I think I really hit a wall going 1,000 miles an hour last summer. In
Yeah.
particular, I'd always had depression, anxiety, never had it affect my life in such a way. I think I manage. I'm a super like type A manager of all of these things. And that comes out in sort of my ambition and the success pursuit and the things that I think might quell those voices and those feelings. But I hit the wall going 1,000 miles an hour and understood the real connection between sort of trauma and depression and anxiety. And when I'm getting off, I think I'm getting off the hamster wheel. I think medicine really helps for me. And so that was a huge shift in my life. But reframing like the voice, and for me, again, going back to that metaphor of voice, like figuring out how to listen to those deep whispers and how to like, which I've also had my whole life. And for me, they happened a lot in college. They were born for me in college. So I have a special place for that time
Yeah.
in my life where I felt like the whole wide world opened up to I got to see, because I grew up in Miami, but I went to school in central Pennsylvania. So I had like urban experience, and then I was like in the middle of cornfields where people didn't lock their car doors, and
Yeah.
there were 3,000 kinds of white bread in the grocery store. And I remember at that time taking all the things that I thought I knew about me, and I've just been in this sort of like compare and despair mode a lot of my life, like trying to find like, where do I fit? Where are my people? Where is my voice welcomed? Like, how do I use the gifts that I feel innately inside of me in a way that can be of service? But, and so it's been, I don't know, like this dance that probably we all go through, but I think the extra layer of sadness or darkness or feeling the hopelessness that can come from those spaces can both be obviously incredible creative fuel and also really scary personal corners that I didn't feel comfortable sharing publicly for a long time. Did you notice when did that start to creep in for you, or how were you able to name like melancholy and the knowing that you have high highs and low lows? Like when did that understanding start to come through for you?
I think it was kind of in my junior year of college where I had an experience where I got high and I smoked weed and I got very high and I thought I lost my mind. I felt like I just went
Mhm.
through the matrix and I realized that everything I knew was not true anymore. And I didn't really recover for quite a while from that
Yeah.
experience. It was really deeply terrifying. And I think all it was doing was showing me whatever, sort of lives. It's not that I hadn't been very depressed prior to that, but there was some sort of element of the surreality of
Mhm.
that experience of being of that consciousness that felt just so terrible, just so terribly awful. And then again, I remember when I was coming to, graduation and having to face the rest of my life, and
Yeah.
I pretty close to lost my mind. I felt disassociation, which for
Yep.
the listening who don't know what that is, it's sort of like an out of body experience where you sort of can't get out of watching your life happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no coping mechanisms. And I
Mm-hmm.
finally got into therapy. So I've been a person who has been in therapy many, 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 many years.
Me
And I'm
too.
a therapy believer. Medication is extremely helpful.
Yep.
Meditation,
Mm-hmm.
exercise, those are my coping
Mm-hmm.
mechanisms. And to be honest, I'm in the middle of a flare up of
Yeah.
anxiety right now at this time in our world. It
Yeah.
feels there's so many things to say about right now that are
Yeah.
is painful and confronting and important and impossible to sort of hold with our language.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of humbled by, I feel humbled by this moment and extraordinarily anxious. So I'm like
Yes.
gut pain, can't
Yes.
sleep, just like all the stuff, calling my therapist with
Yeah.
emergency, I'm doing all the things and
Yeah.
it's not going that well right now. So
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that because me too. I upped my therapy to 3 days a week when this started because I knew I needed almost a daily check-in,
yeah,
and tools, right? Because what I love about therapy, and I too have been going since college actually, was where that also opened up for me. And thank God at Penn State, I got free counseling, which is like now I look back and I'm like, I had 4 years of free therapy, but I have been in it for almost 30 years at this point. And, um, but I upped the tools now. And last summer when I hit the wall, which for me, actually, I got off of an airplane. So I've never done this before. I was in New York and I had to get off of an airplane because I thought I was having a heart attack. My panic attack was so extreme. And, we had just pulled back from the tarmac. We just started to pull away from the gate rather. And I knew that I couldn't stay on the plane and I was flying alone. And, I asked to get off the plane and then I had this wave of shame because I thought, you get really paranoid too, or I get paranoid in those anxiety attacks where I'm like, it's never going to end. How am I going to get out of this? And I asked to get off the plane. And unfortunately, I didn't have very kind flight attendants who were generous, right? They were pretty judgmental and not very helpful. And that added to the shame. And so anyway, my story goes with like wandering around JFK in a full meltdown for like 4 hours before I could calm down and like get on the phone and figure out what to do. And I stayed in New York and Felipe came out and got me a couple days later or a day later. And I think when I hit that wall, what I realized was there are times when we're going to be dealing with these issues and that flare up, I don't know that I saw coming, Sarah. Like, I think partly it was like, this was like last June and it was a combination of a lot of factors, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I remember feeling like, wow, I'm out of tools. Like the therapy that I'm doing isn't cutting it. And I actually went to an intensive outpatient program for a couple of weeks that changed my life because I was able to do therapy like 8 hours a day. And I had such a stigma in my mind about doing that. A little bit like, oh gosh, does this mean I can't handle myself? And I'm like past
right.
the point of no return. And then I realized, oh no, this is actually probably the biggest tool I could give myself would be I got level to my knees this time
Yeah,
around.
yeah. That's incredible. How did
Yeah.
you find the outpatient? How did you find the resource?
Brene, actually. I
Amazing.
know. Brene Brown is a lovely human, of course we know, and a friend. And she helped me with a referral recommendation. And my therapist concluded, and it was just a great space to go. And Felipe came with me, so I did because I think when you're in partnership and you have anxiety and depression, that's a hard thing if your partner isn't. My husband does share in it a little bit in his own life, but it's also you want to be the most supportive partner. And it's almost sometimes quicksand to get involved with in your partner in that way. And so I did a week of intensive 8-hour day therapy. And then we did a week of couples work together. That was incredible. It's a program called The Meadows in Arizona. And it was honestly, it was life-saving. And I think that's where even this idea for the show came from was like the conversations around death were important for me because I had physical losses, but it was also this loss of self that comes at various stages of your life that I find when we get to be adults, we don't have,
Oh,
right?
yes.
We don't
Yeah.
have framework for, we don't get conversation about. We have all these ritual moments when we're younger women, and then we get into this space sometimes where, and people, not just women, have these moments. But I was like, I want to talk about all these other little deaths, these other things that happen that are impactful, but I don't have language for.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's true. We don't, I think there's so much that goes unspoken. And what I see in the world right now, this time aside, which is such an acute and such an important
Yes.
kind of pain that we're witnessing, but people carry so much pain.
Yeah.
People, every kind of pain, and every kind
Yes.
of person carries so much pain, and we lack the tools with how to express it, and that's how it becomes distorted into
Yes.
white supremacy and into
Yes.
misogyny and into deactivating instead of activating. And it's one of the things that I think I feel really, I'm so grateful that you're so open about how
Mm.
you get help, and because
Mm-hmm.
I'm also that way, and I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
am waving the therapy flag
Yes.
as loud as I can. I'm just like,
Yes.
we should get one when we come into the world,
Ah,
because if you find the
agreed.
right one, of course, I mean, having the
Yeah.
right person is also,
Yeah.
I've had bad ones too, but
Yeah.
you know it's being alive is hard.
Yes. And knowing and learning to know yourself and love yourself is hard, and that's the other part is I mean, I've certainly been a part of the empowerment space where we've been having all this we do all this we got to love yourself and, we have all these mantras that are important. And then I get fatigued by them a bit because they kind of betray the actual work that comes from a real deep relationship to who you are.
Yeah.
And for me, I thought that, like many people, that I could shortcut all of that and get sort of external validation for all the parts that were empty inside or not as nurtured.
Yeah.
And now I'm really kind of excited about reclaiming, remothering, renurturing these places that for me have been stagnant and stuck. A lot of what I've held away and kept away have been parts of me I've been ashamed of or didn't feel like I could fully express. Or I mean, even doing a show like this, the title of We're All Gonna Die Anyway is just something I've actually said to myself to keep myself grounded in things that make me go over the edge, right? And then I'm thinking of launching it during a time where people are dying.
Yeah.
Like we are dying and lives are not being honored, and we're treating hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people around the world as though they don't exist. And so I've been, grappling with you know, how do we talk about big death, little death, and hopefully at the other end of it, the rebirth and the
Yeah.
resurrection and the, reclaiming, because we do have, I think we have a responsibility while we are alive to learn about ourselves, to do no harm to others,
Right.
and to give something back in
Yeah.
this life, to leave it better than we found it. And I don't mean that in a career sense. I just mean that in a human sense.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think
Yeah.
it's our lucky privilege as people who get to walk on the earth, that we get to make an impact. And so
Yeah.
we get to decide what to do with that. Yeah.
I wonder if there's people listening to us, though. Obviously, we'll be very aware and are deep and devoted. You have such a beautiful fan base of really incredibly connected, I think, people. But I'm curious. I bet you somebody watching from the outside might wonder if during those times of darker moments where you can't sleep or where things are feeling anxious, do you use the career success, the love or adoration externally that people might validate and have for your art? Does that ever become a tool that helps soothe you during that time? Or are those moments, like most of us with accomplishments, we can't kind of access that sort of
Mm.
love at that time? I'm curious.
Oh, that's interesting. I have a very tenuous relationship with that, because I feel like it's really easy to start to use it as a crutch, where it's
I
like,
could
if
see
I'm
that.
not being validated in that way, I don't have value and I don't have
Yes.
worth, and I'm not okay. Um, so
Hmm.
I tend to err on the side of trying to stay sort of human first, and then
Yes.
artist second, even though they're very much enmeshed and intertwined. But
Yeah.
in terms of my relationship to being a public person, I'm really, really careful about that. Although I have to say, in this time of lockdown, we recently put up a concert DVD of an old
Mm-hmm.
show that I
I
did in my
saw that.
solo show, and um, I I don't read comments very often, but I did read some of the comments on Instagram after that, and it was really a beautiful reminder of the fact
Mm-hmm.
that people need connection, and I'm lucky that what I make is soothing or comforting to people on
Yes.
some level. And so that is, I mean, that's the most I could ever hope for that. And that was soothing to me, to know
That's
that
great.
my work was offering solace in a time of like, oh my God, just fucking where can I get it? Like
Yeah,
everybody
for real.
for something to
Yeah.
make them feel okay. So that is, but I have, as an artist, felt very quiet in this time. I
Hmm.
felt very overwhelmed and very, um, I was really allergic to sort of this rush towards productivity
Yes.
at the beginning of this lockdown. I felt like, I'm like, we're not paying attention. Like if you're constantly
Yeah.
the machine that's making something, we're not metabolizing what's going on.
Right.
And so I felt very quiet. I'm starting to see the shift in that there's
Mm.
some sort of churning in me that needs to make something again, I guess, which is a nice, like you were saying,
Yeah.
making this is a reason to sort of
Yeah.
get up and get going, and it's a good thing.
Yes. But that I've heard you talk about it as tending to your own garden during this time, which I think is feels really right again for me too, which in the beginning too, I thought, are you crazy? There's no fucking way I'm writing a novel during this time. I can barely brush my teeth during this time, let alone like, and I started eating like all the childhood food that I noticed that I never eat anymore. Like I have rediscovered Pop-Tarts during quarantine. Like unfrosted Pop Tarts, which is different from my childhood. But I'm like, I'm a grown ass woman who wants a Pop Tart every day for breakfast.
Yeah.
Anything to sort of nurture. And so it was a suspended area of, and it still is for me in this moment of time where I thought, God, look at us. We're so addicted to the hustle and the productivity. To your point, metabolizing is a great word. Integrating, like listening, all of that private introspection that we talked about earlier, that was like formative for us growing up. Like we actually have been almost mandated to explore that now if you can, and not everybody has the luxury of doing that
Yeah.
during this time, but for those who can, like it's been that to me has been such a gift. Like we all got grounded, not just the US, not New York, not LA, like the whole world sort of stopped down, and getting off that hamster wheel was a shock, but I actually am so looking forward to it never returning back to the way it was. I don't know what it will be.
I know. I think that we don't get to go back, right? Like
No.
there's this whole, I found myself clinging to it for a certain period of time. It's like, oh, when will things go back to normal? And then I was like, what is normal? Like,
Right.
was normal good? Like, I
Right.
don't think so. I
Yeah.
actually don't think that normal, the way I knew normal, because I tend to agree with, I resonate with what you were saying about, I have just, I have been working too much and too
Yeah.
hard, and I'm not present in my life, and I'm like
Yeah.
addicted to productivity, and I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to do that
No.
anymore. It's not
Yeah.
me. And so I'm in this like very fucked up, uncomfortable transition into whatever comes next. But so is the world. Like the world
Yes.
is, we are in process.
Yes,
And
we are.
it is, someone said that this morning. A friend of mine sent me a voice memo and was like, as we both like can't stop crying. We're just,
Yeah.
and feels like terrible for crying. It's just like, fucking get over yourself. It's like more important than my tears right now. And but like, this is process. We have to
Yes.
honor the
Yes.
process, how we get to a better place.
Yes, and in such a performative world right now, where in some ways, and we talked about this, I think before we officially were recording, was, we've become overly reliant on screens during this time. And while in some ways that's exceptional because we've maintained connection, it's
Yes.
deeply dissatisfying
Yeah.
for like human emotional, sensitive, like connection. And I'm noticing the hunger that I have for that in a meaningful way, and how much of it in my life was there in not a meaningful way. I mean,
Yeah.
meetings after meetings, like even watching the way work is going to change is so interesting, right? All of a sudden people are realizing, oh wow, right? Working mothers have it way harder than we thought. And maybe we don't have to have all of these sort of arbitrary work days in the way that we've had them. Maybe we can look at how we produce differently. Like I'm very interested in that messy space because it does challenge everything I was very addicted to before. And if I'm being honest with myself, I have really loved the lack of performance pressure during this time that I can do for myself. Like I sort of like, I guess, sort of deprioritized all of those things because I had to. And then I had to really meet myself where I was and where I am. And sometimes that's great. Most of the time it's not been great. And that's okay too, because it is process.
Right, right. It just has to be honest. You have to
Yeah.
like call it what it is
Yeah.
and to work. Yeah. Yeah.
We met, I was mentioning earlier, so we met through Mona Tavakoli, a powerful force in the world in her own right. And I met you through Girls Rock Camp in Los Angeles. And I was thinking about creativity. I was thinking as we were both talking about like the lessons that you can pay forward to people and young people in particular as they're journeying. And I find a lot of young people, are actually very tuned into their own depression or anxiety, or they're having names for some of the challenges they may be facing in their life way earlier than I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but, when we talk about working with young people or the dreams that they have, I'm curious about like what you would say or what you would share with somebody young at this time, looking out at the world, maybe feeling like you, wanting to have a voice and an expression and their own art and their own imprint on the world. What would you grab for them to tell them about dreams? Because you've had some dreams that have been deferred. You've had some dreams that have been realized. I
Mhm.
think as you were singing the theme song to Little Voice the other day on your social, you were saying that it was a song you wrote many years ago
Yeah.
that wasn't deemed right for that album or whatever. So all these things that I think we're thinking about, all these dreams we want to put out into the world, you've had them come true. You've had them not come true. You've had to wait for some. I'm curious what your relationship is to dreams and what we would say to people dreaming now.
Oh man, I think you know, this is not a time to give up on
Mm,
big dreams, but I think it is a time to be really intentional and reflective about them. I
mm,
think I think it's a time to really examine the world and examine
mm,
our place in the world and examine um, sometimes I think we attach ourselves to these big ideas
mhm,
that we've seen a lot in media, that we've seen other people have and acquire. And
mm.
there's all this research about happiness, and it has absolutely nothing to do with things you acquire or how
Right.
big your house is or how much money you have. It has nothing to do with that. So
Amen.
I think it's an interesting time because I one of the things I remember about doing work with young women,
Mhm,
especially the really little girls who
mhm,
aren't quite they're self-reflective, but they're still searching for
mhm.
their place in a certain way, as we all are forever and ever. But it's like, what do you do if you want to be famous? Like, what do I do
Mm,
if I want to be famous? There's an idea about
yeah,
fame or
yeah,
about um, being a pop star or being a musician in a certain capacity or being on a magazine cover. It's like, examining these dreams to ask yourself, what is it
mhm,
about that I'm drawn to? Because if the answer is, I want to feel fully expressed and I want to feel happy in
mhm,
making something I love, then yes, you go,
mhm.
you do that. If it's any of the other stuff, if it's any of the superficial bullshit,
Yeah,
I think you really need to take a moment and check yourself for your authenticity in where you're headed, because there is so much that is literally shattering in front of our faces.
totally.
Facades that have been their glass castles, and they're coming down, and they should. We're
Yeah,
reframing the world right now, and we need to do it in a more intentional, holistic, equitable way.
yes,
So be someone who's building that castle, because that is the castle I want to live in.
yes. I literally could not agree more because I think that I love the idea of intentionally looking for also where you can not just be of service, but where you find yourself in being of service. Like I
Yeah.
think the fun part of like, of performing or for me of speaking, of connecting is, yes, I'm being of service with the message, but I'm connected to a person and I'm being of service emotionally. I'm choosing to be vulnerable, or I'm choosing to be creative, or I'm choosing to be a problem solver. Like, I love the idea that dreams for me are guideposts and not goalposts.
Yeah.
Like, I think in the past, I've been so attached to them as being like the end all be all. And if I didn't hit it, I felt like a failure, or I felt like I had messed up. And now, as I guess I'm getting older, I'm realizing, oh, dreams are just kind of, they're guiding me, right? If I have an idea to do something, I love your advice of ask yourself the why, like, why do I want to do this? And if it is about, an external validation, or feeling like when you finally get X, you're going to feel happy. That's
Right.
probably the biggest lie we've told ourselves our whole lives.
Remember, there's no plateau, and that is a beautiful thing. Thank
Right.
God there's no plateau. How
Yeah.
boring to get somewhere and never want to go anywhere else. Like,
Yeah.
that is the giant myth that we get to dismantle and reconstruct right now. But
Yeah.
all those young dreamers, it's like, yes, have big dreams, but
Yes.
think about your place in the world as a community, being of service. Like, where do you fit into the larger picture instead of
Yes.
being so focused on my story, what is my dream, like my acquisitions. That
Yeah.
that stuff falls apart really quickly and does not make you happy. We've just seen it so many times.
We have seen it so many times. I was thinking as we were talking about the struggle now in this incredible time of transformation and reckoning. I think we're doing a lot of reckoning with systems that are outdated and hurtful and oppressive. And I was thinking in the beginning, when we got into this kind of lockdown, we're all going through grief, various stages of grief in many different ways. I mean, I could see it within myself. Like, if we follow the stages of grief, whether it was bargaining or loss or anger or sadness, and they're never in a linear line. They're always, you kind of feel them at random. But I think about grief a lot because we're losing a lot right now. And I think what we're saying, what I'm hearing us say is, like, some of what we're losing is really good and appropriate, and we need to be losing it. But there is that heaviness of loss, as we were talking about, of loss of identity, loss of roles in our life, loss of dreams, loss of relationships. And I'm curious how you've intersected with that in your life. Loss. I don't know if you've had any significant deaths in your life, or if there have been losses that have shaped maybe the way you live or the way you choose to live because you lost somebody or something.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate in terms of, well, not fortunate, but I mean, I have lost family members. My grandparents are all
Mm.
gone, and I have an uncle who passed. Um, but my immediate family is healthy, and I'm very grateful for that. I am in a constant evolution of a relationship with loss, and I
Mm.
think that is, I don't know if I have any great like advice about it.
Yeah.
It's a constant. It is. It's always different. Everything feels different. I liked what you said earlier about, like, we have to lose versions of ourselves. I feel like there's something I'm grappling with right now personally, which is this sort of fearful child in me that
Mm.
I'm having to let go of. Like,
Yeah.
it's not helpful anymore.
Yeah.
I love you, and I'm going to scoop you up, and I promise I'm going to protect you. And now we have to, like, get up off the floor.
Yeah.
And I'm there's so much loss that we're witnessing with this incredible revolution we're watching happen, the Black Lives Matter movement coming
Yes.
into the foreground for the first time, really to the zeitgeist in the way that it should be.
Absolutely.
And white voices like mine learning for the first time to shut the fuck up, to listen, that I have so much to learn, I have so much to unlearn, and I am
Mm.
here not to talk, to
Yeah.
just listen and to go to beautiful resources like the Black Lives Matter movement and support things
Yes.
like NAACP and Color of Change and organizations that are working to make this world look like what it does look like, but
Yes.
with allowances for
I
everybody.
I love that you said things to learn and unlearn, because I actually think this is the time of great unlearning, or it can be the
Yes.
time of great unlearning. But in order to do that, I think the thing that I'm always looking out for in my wellness journey as a human is like recognizing, always being careful with myself to know that to unlearn means I'm going to have to face some painful privilege points of what I've either benefited from or things that have served me. Like you were talking about letting go of that fearful child part of you. I mean, I've had many, many remothering moments with myself of trying to look at parts of my childhood or adolescence or even young adulthood where I go, God, I know exactly why you formed that way, but you are not serving me in this body, in this life right now. And I think like, I'm 46. I'll be 47 in October. I definitely think I'm in the throes of what is a midlife like revolution of thinking and reality, right? Of realizing that like, holy shit, God willing, if all goes well, I'm like halfway there maybe, right? And then you look and you go, how do I want to spend the other half? Or if I'm granted that time, like, are all the things that I valued before really what I value now?
Yeah.
And if I change it, will I lose people? I bet, I wonder if you feel that same way, right? If I change or let go of these parts of me that I've been attached to or others have been attached to, then who am I? How will they love me? How will they know to love me? How will they know I'm here?
Totally. Yeah. It's a lot of having to have faith that, the phoenix will rise, that we have to
Yeah.
believe that the parts of ourselves that we are shedding. And I want to make sure that I mention I got the terminology, the great unlearn from
Mhm.
a woman named Rachel Cargill, who's
Yes.
a Black woman who's has incredible resources and she's worth following. And
Yes.
so that is something for people to check out. But I think that we have to trust that the parts of ourselves that we are shedding just no longer serve us. We have to
Yeah.
let them go. We have to release them.
Yeah. One of the one of the things that I'm focusing on with this program, even though, depending on who I'm talking to, sometimes we spend a lot of time on death, sometimes we spend more of it on living, but I had this experience. I don't know if I had shared this with you, but I had an experience of why I knew I needed to do this program was because I became friends with a woman the last 8 weeks of her life that she was on this planet. Her name is Myra. She was a client of mine, actually. And I only had one meeting with her, and she was just my kind of person. She cursed and she was no bullshit. And she was trying to do amazing things in her marketing role. And I loved her. And cut to, I get a call from her husband, who I've never met before. Mind you, Sarah, I've never had a drink with her. I've never had a conversation with this woman, but she decided to stop her treatment, her chemotherapy. She had stage 4 cancer, very aggressive cancer. And she called me to come over to her house. She wanted to see me. And Felipe and I went over, and I remember not at all knowing what I was going to experience. But when I went over there, um, she had just been told she had 2 months to live. She has 3 small children at the time. And this was just 2 years ago. She died January 4th, 2018. But I remember sitting with her in her garden. She was having a good moment, speaking of gardens. And I said to her, if you could share with me, what do you think about when you know that your time has been given an end date? And she told me 3 things that impacted me the most. But, one was that she had no more time for toxic people, that she had just spent way too much time focused on even toxic family members that she was just getting rid of in her life. She just was like, I've spent too much time worrying about people who don't love me.
Yeah.
And then the second one was she missed the simple pleasures of being in a body that was healthy, like the taste of a mango and the
Mm.
things that she loved to do that she was having trouble doing in her deteriorating state. And then the third thing was, I think, what was the aha for me to start to examine my relationship with whatever I thought was success and whatever. She said, I did everything that people wanted me to do, and I made all the money and I got the titles, and I didn't spend enough time learning about me.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And yeah, and it was so beautiful that she could share it. It was so important, I think, in my life at that time to hear it, because what I realized was like, if these were the 3 takeaways when you knew there was you had sort of this end date, that this was terminal. For those of us who walk around this world, we all believe, I mean, we're all going to die. That is the truth. We don't know when or how it's going to happen. And so it just got me this jolt of urgency. Like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what person am I being, and what am I valuing? And so anyway, it kind of got me on this kick about urgent living, but not in a stressful way, just in that like alignment way that you were talking about, in that way where you just feel, talking to the trees, singing out loud, making these things, like just being fully expressed of
Mhm.
self and connected to other people, and saying the things that we want to say, and not sitting on them anymore. So that's kind of what brought me to these convos. And so I'm always curious then to see, and I just with that preset, like, what do you think you are maybe urgently drawn to right now in your life? And you've said it a little bit. Is it the listening? Is it the resting? But like, where, when you feel the urgency in your body right now, what does it draw you to? What do you think about?
I think about, it's a really interesting time to be answering that question. Wow. I think about examining the cross section of art and service. I think that's where I think I have been sitting on, a half-baked idea of some kind of foundation, of some sort of formalized way to give back or to do deeper work with young women, because I'm
Mm.
so passionate. That is something that's like for whatever reason, since I was a little girl, I am so impassioned about letting little girls know how powerful they are. I just,
Yeah.
and I know you feel the exact same way, but
Mhm.
like, oh, I love talking to you. I'm so passionate about reminding them of how powerful they already are. It's nothing they have to learn. It's nothing they don't know how to do. It's
Yes.
already baked in. So I feel really like maybe that is part of what is
Mhm.
coming through right now, is that there is an urgency to do that. And with this beautiful and really difficult conversation about race, to
Mhm.
figure out my how do I best listen? How do I best show up as an ally? Um,
Mhm.
it's confronting for those of us who have always thought of themselves as allies.
That's
I am
right.
someone who believes in inclusivity and diversity. I've always fought for that. I thought, and it's really embarrassing to get to a place where you realize, oh, nope, I wasn't
Mhm.
doing enough, and
Mhm.
I'm not doing enough. And so that is a something I'm really, really sitting with for the moment and
Yeah.
trying to just take in and listen. But I think it has to do with the intersection of art. I'm
Yeah.
not interested in making songs that end up on the radio. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, great if they end up on the radio, but if they don't mean more to somebody, or it's not serving a greater purpose, I don't need that anymore in my
Yeah.
life. So I'm excited about deepening my commitment to being of service.
And what a gift too, to be able to articulate that now, not just for other people, but for yourself, to also know. It's like, I always, when you're talking, I was visualizing, I do this in my brain sometimes, like monkey bars, how you have to like let go of one to go to the next one. But
Oh,
it's like, like that's what I was thinking as you were saying that. Like, it's amazing just to acknowledge what you are willing to let go of in order to let in this next vision, or this next kind of I love the idea of art and service. I mean, that feels like it's embedded in so much of your work anyway, but how you might formalize that or create
yeah,
that
yeah.
is really powerful. I remember, do you remember when we I met one time for tea? I think we were in the Soho Grand or whatever. Remember we were talking, you hadn't done Waitress yet. You were just, I think, embarking upon that space. And I look at like legacy as well as urgency, like the things that you're able to leave behind and the art you create and the work that you do. And Waitress has done such a beautiful, I think, beautiful job of that around the world, in bringing people that joy and that story. What does Little Voice mean for you coming up? Like that, you said that that's been kind of the theme and language in your life for a long time, but in this moment now, as you think about releasing it in this moment, what do you think that means for you?
Well, this show, it's so interesting because, like most things, like everything really in my life, it didn't it's not the show I thought I was going to make. when I went into it, it's not what I was aiming at, but I think it's what we were meant to make. And so it was a really tough teacher, this show. It was a really tough
Mm,
teacher. It was a really grueling process, and not without joy, not without,
yeah.
lots of celebratory moments. I But it was a really, wow, did it just ring me out. But I think what we made was something that has um, a lot of kindness and a lot of sweetness and a lot of
Mm.
tenderness and a lot of music. And so to be able to offer that in this moment in the world, it feels good to me.
Yeah.
It is, it's a song. It's a story about finding your voice. Some of these songs are songs that I wrote when I was in my early 20s, which is the age of our main character, a wonderful young actress named Brittany O'Grady. And um, I feel excited to sort of, go on the ride with her. When I go
Hmm.
back and I watch the episodes, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is a fun ride. I think, it's not my story, but it's a story that's kind of like an amalgamation of so much that I've heard of and experienced in my life. And but it's about a young woman finding her voice, and I think that I never get tired of seeing that story. So I
No.
hope that it resonates for someone who needs it.
Is it surreal sometimes when you see the songs you created at a different age and stage of your life come out here? Do they come out with a different kind of energy, or do they feel familiar? Like, what does that feel like for you?
Oh, it's so interesting. It's just like the theme song, the song
Mhm.
Little Voice. I mean, I wrote it when I was 24 or 25, and I wrote it. I had a dream about writing this song for my first record. It was so important to me. It was so important
Mhm.
that I put this song on the record, and then they didn't let me put this song on my record. Well, I should say I wasn't strong enough to
Right,
demand at that time. I didn't feel like I could. I wasn't
right.
allowed. I was, as a woman, as a young artist, they know better. Um, and so it's really interesting to me that this is the journey for that
Yeah.
song. And as writers, as artists, the things we create, we have to trust their soul too. We have to trust
Yes.
their story, their soul is coming out, you know, for a reason, and you know, it will come out when it's ready. And
Yeah.
so it was a long birth canal for that one.
You were in labor for quite some time. Yeah, but that's so beautiful, and that's out July
July 10th
July 10th.
will be the first few episodes, to my knowledge. It's the first 2 or 3 episodes on July 10th, and then consecutive
It's
episodes,
on
and hopefully
Apple?
Apple TV. Yeah.
I love that. You know what's so interesting? I wanna end on your voice actually, and a quote that I love that I always like to do, like, "This is your life. I'm gonna quote you from an interview in 2015," but it's a quote that is so powerful. But before I read it and ask my last question, the thing that I wanted to say about this part is when I think about this time, artists and storytellers and musicians and um, dreamers, they are who those that's been our lifeline during this time. We've absorbed stories, at least, to help survive, to help connect, to help remember, to help challenge. Like, it is such an interesting, when you talk about a piece of art having its own energy and soul and timeline.
Mhm.
I think about, God, we would have never, I'm sure at the beginning of the year when we all had grand plans for 2020, that this was not what we thought we'd be heading into July. But I do believe rejection's God's protection in a big way.
Yeah.
And those kinds of detours and roadblocks end up revealing themselves in the end.
Agreed. Agreed.
Mhm. All right. So this is a quote that you said that I loved. You said, I think everyone has vulnerabilities and everyone feels messy or shameful or not good enough. And I would rather share that hope to create connection. I would rather share that and hope to create connection than pretend my life is a highlight reel. It's just not. It's human. Do you remember saying this quote?
It sounds like me. Yeah. It sounds
Well, this is the part that I love that I mean, I loved all of it, but you said, and we've heard this in our conversation today, celebrity or otherwise, there's no human out there that has some sort of plateau of happiness. It just doesn't exist. So
yeah.
I would rather speak to the highs and the lows of what it means to have a dynamic lifestyle and a dynamic life than pretend I'm fucking happy all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's true. I think there's so much. Oh, we're just avoiding our pain. We're avoiding
I
our pain
know.
all the time, and it's and then you see what that looks like. You know,
Right.
it's I don't claim I don't want to sit in it all the time, but
No.
you know, you got to sit in it when it's time to sit in it.
Right.
And I would rather I have found personally so much comfort when people share their pain or share
Yeah.
their vulnerabilities. I feel seen. I feel comforted.
Yeah.
I feel hopeful because I realize, oh, my experience, I'm not alone in this. And so I'm
Mm.
happy to be, you know, shouting from the mountaintops, I'm a mess.
Me too.
Yeah.
Last question, I guess, is what is the most joyful things that have been happening lately? Like, where are the moments where you have found joy,
Um,
as
we
teeny tiny as they may be?
we planted I went out of town for a couple days because I was really bouncing off the walls, and I came back and my boyfriend Joe had given me a garden. So there was the little herb garden
Oh,
that is on my back balcony here, and it was a really kind and a very he was really paying attention, and so that gesture
mm,
brings me a lot of joy. And that little basil plant out there is so happy. My mint is not doing that well, which is shocking because mint is supposed to do really well. But you know, I'm learning. I'm new to this, but I that brings me a lot of joy.
yeah,
And you know, connection with friends, with you, with
yeah,
the gift of this virus, of all of these viruses, is that we're getting the chance to see how much people matter. We
yeah,
matter to each
yes.
other, and so the people that are already close to you, my God, cherish them. And the people that you want to be closer to, it's now is the time to really invest in those relationships.
Amen, sweet sister friend, for sure. You bring me joy. I thank you for leaning in a time maybe where it didn't always feel so awesome to do so today. I'm really grateful that we were in conversation, and I'm always really grateful for your honesty. It is superior, and your heart and your love is healing. And I was happy to share this moment with you and see your wonderful face. So,
Thank you. You too, Jess.
yeah, thank you,
Congrats
love.
on all of this too. It's so good that this is out in the world.
I feel I feel lit up by this conversation because it's just so juicy and heartfelt and kind. You know, she really is a kind soul, and I'm sure that you felt that as you were listening. Couple of things that I'm thinking about as a takeaway for me in this conversation. I mean, one is I appreciate and will never stop appreciating when somebody who's in the public eye, who has a fan base, who has a platform, who has people, you know, watching every move and discussing every move and having opinions about everything in their life. When somebody who occupies that kind of public space cares enough and dares enough to be so genuine, so clear, so open and giving with their experience, I don't want to underestimate just how much it takes to be able to say, yeah, I'm not in a great space right now. This moment is really triggering for me from an anxiety and depression standpoint. I'm feeling kind of dark. You know, before we started taping, Sarah talked about how she was thinking even about canceling this conversation today because, you know, she was having a rough day. And that is why I appreciate and love her as a person, is that she shows up. I'm grateful as a friend that she showed up, but I'm grateful for us in this conversation that she showed up, because didn't you see so much of your story in her? I mean, I did. I, you know, live a very different life and find all of this connection. And that's what I wanted to talk about on this program. I want us to remember that our connections are not that far apart and not that different from each other. And especially when we're talking about big things, life, death, loss, depression, anxiety, you know, the state of the world, systemic racism, violence, pandemics. I mean, all of it, right? It's so heavy right now, and important work is being done. And what I appreciated too about this conversation was Sarah kind of describing it as listening, metabolizing, she said. I call it integrating. We were both calling it kind of tending to our own gardens, like really absorbing what was happening. I appreciate that kind of process because I think in this fast-paced world, we're often zooming on to the next sort of performative act and feeling like we've got to know everything and be perfect at everything right away. And we're so not. So I appreciate her candor, especially around some of the tougher moments for people to admit in their life. I appreciate her tenderness and her gifts, certainly both in her music, but in her gifts of her heart, in her searching, in her yearning, because obviously that shows through in the work that she does, because we can feel her connecting to us and connecting to herself. So I'm taking away from this what a gift it is to be transparent and vulnerable, what a strength it is to admit when you're not feeling okay. And what a love it is to, even in the darkest and sometimes most horrible moments of our life, find that one person or that one moment or that one thing that we can find joy in, find connection in, find trust in, and believe in again. And so that is my wish for more conversations to come on this program. You're an incredible part of this journey. I'm doing this for us, for you, and wouldn't be able to do it without you. So thank you for joining us and digging in, and I can't wait for our next convo. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Weiner. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jessweiner.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jessweiner.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.